morning and welcome to the Breastplate Prayer Devotional. I am your host, Bishop Larry Jackson. Today, we will discuss God's desire for Israel to function as priests. But before we do, we got to go back a little bit. We have to go back to the point where there isn't a nation. Abraham received from God a covenant promise that he would be the father of this nation. That a people would come from his loins when he was 100 years old and his wife was barren and 90 years old. Think about that for a moment. You're going to have a nation, you're already 100, your wife is already 90 and can't have children. But God says a nation is going to come out of you. But then God goes on to tell him something even greater than that. He says, this nation that comes out of you that will be great will also find itself in persecution and captivity. And they'll be in captivity for 430 years. And what I find interesting is that God doesn't tell him what will happen after the 430-year time expires. He tells them that they're going to go into captivity. He tells them that they're going to be a great nation, but he doesn't tell them what's going to happen after the 400 years of captivity. No one knew until they were delivered from Egypt and gathered at the base of Mount Sinai. And Israel didn't know. No one knew. God tells Moses that he would make these slaves, listen to this now, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, a peculiar treasure to himself. Based on the previous lesson that we learned about the function of the priest, these people would now represent God to the other nation and represent the nations to God. They are told in Exodus 19 to prepare for God to descend upon Mount Sinai, and in 3 days he would come, not to have marital relations, to clean all their clothes and themselves and set boundaries around the mountain so that no person or animal would touch the mountain because God had declared the mountain to be holy. They did all this in preparation to encounter God who delivered them from the greatest and most powerful nation on earth in Egypt. No other nation even rivaled Egypt, and God destroyed that great army in the Red Sea and showed him his great power after sending plague upon plague upon plague upon Egypt to get Pharaoh's heart to be softened enough to let them go. So here they have instruction. Prepare for God to come in 3 days. Let me read that out of Exodus 19, starting about verse 16. It says, And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceedingly loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. Wow. Now God comes in this third day, but it's an amazing coming. Now, verse 17 says of Exodus 19, it says, And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the either part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded loud and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him with a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. Now, all this caused the people to move away from the mountain. This is an amazing scene, an amazing time of earthquake and fire, trumpet sounding, shofar is sounding. God is speaking out of this time. He's definitely speaking to them in their language that they can hear and understand. But they didn't expect this. God came down in a way that they would clearly understand who they were dealing with. they had no idea who he was, but now they would understand. You're dealing with a holy God, and you will need to now also be holy and be above reproach, because you're going to represent this holy God to nations. So God came to establish their priesthood, but they didn't want any parts of his plan. They asked Moses to go before God and hear for them, and they would do whatever he said. This didn't please God or Moses, but it was done. And they never became the priests that God had said that they would become. Never became the priests that God said that they would become. Because the priest's office is designed to stand between an unholy people and a holy God, to bring from God the information these people that can't get to God need, and to deliver to God the needs of the people who can't get to God. And so this doesn't happen because they are not functioning in their priesthood, because they rejected the voice of God. They rejected the presence of God when he comes down off of the mountain, so that they can no longer function in this place that they're supposed to be functioning in, which is the place God has called each of us to function in. This place of the between, in between, or the gap, as the Bible calls it, to stand the gap for a lost and a dying generation. Well, thank you again for joining me today. And be sure now to visit my website at bishoplarryjackson.com. I'm giving away a free copy of my book, Guilt-Free Living. Did you know that there are only 3 sins in the entire world? Well, get your free copy and learn more. Visit the site, bishoplarryjackson.com. And until the next time, approach the throne boldly. Bye-bye.